Oh, you could come up now if you wished.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne. So you've been around this table before, you know the rules.
Yes, I don't think I've actually sat in the seat before.
It's the hot seat, mate.
It's a hot seat.
So you have 10 minutes, and within that 10 minutes you need to calculate for any questions you want taken. But you can use the whole time yourself if you like.
I'm not going to do that.
No, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, councillors. Hello, nice to see you. Yeah, very good. Now, yes, I received your document, as I said, at the meeting that I came to. I came to one of the public meetings. It wasn't an easy meeting for the chairman to chair, the one that I went to.
Oh.
However, yes, and I'm in here to actually support the preferred option, which I think is B, is it not? Is that
Yes,
correct?
B.
B, yes. But there's a few things I want to just make a comment on. One is that the document compares Hawke's Bay and the Port of Tauranga, the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and its relationship with Port of Napier, and EBOP and the Port of Tauranga. But the privatisation of Tauranga was actually not done by Bay of Plenty. It was really because Waikato sold its shares. It really wasn't that that the Bay of Plenty Regional Council sold its shares. They didn't buy them. And similarly, Waikato also owned 25% of Auckland, and they became the public share offering in Auckland. So it is a different situation.
It is.
Yes, so anyway, there we go. But the interesting result, of course, is that Bay of Plenty has actually expanded and developed enormously thanks to the ownership of the public, privatisation. It's easy to get these things wrong. The privatisation of some of those shares, and it has allowed the ports of Tauranga to do very well indeed. And Auckland, of course, bought back shares, which has really left its port in a somewhat floundering state. But I'm not going to support the idea of leasing nor the sale to a single investor. I think a single investor would be too difficult to handle. But the public listing, I think, is a good idea. I feel that we possibly in Hawke's Bay, by owning the whole port, we have got a lot of eggs in one basket, and we are putting ourselves at risk of perhaps having a natural disaster that would knock the income of this council and actually the income of all of us enormously. So I am going to encourage you to do a public share offering, and you would then have the opportunity to look at other investments. However, I think that you really should stay below 40%, and I would suggest 35%, if that is an adequate amount to pay the debt and to make other investments. The reason I say that is that I think that in the future, it would mean that if these shares do as we would hope they would, which would rise because of the prosperity of the port, people receiving good dividends, they'd be a popular investment for people like myself. And then the regional council would be in the position one day when there was something big that you needed to do, perhaps to sell another 10% of shares on the market without the cost of doing the IPO. That's really all I've got to say to you. And I think if the port is successful and the share price rises as shareholders get confidence and they enjoy the dividends, you will be in the position to further capitalise. Embark on a new venture leading to further growth, prosperity and success in this clean and healthy environment. Do you still say that on the front of your books? A region that...
I think we do.
A slightly different version. The environment
means the same thing, doesn't it?
Yes, same words, but environment comes first.
Still there.
Yeah, still there.
So I haven't got anything else to say. You can ask me a question if you like.
Yeah, no, thank you. Questions? Start with Neil.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely to see you, Adrienne.
Thank you.
Just a question in regard to, we've had a lot of comment on the dividend, the pernicious way we've gouged the dividend over many decades. What's your view on the dividends that we've extracted?
Well, it's actually done on an annual basis with discussions in the port, isn't it? I think probably you people run away with the money a bit. The rates have gone up as well. But no, I'm not at all sure what the dividend would be in the future. And we don't really know the value of this port. We don't know that until such time as port shares are available to the public, do we? There's no way of knowing the value. And if you look at the Port of Tauranga, its actual dividend return, I think, is about 2.8%. But people are still buying the shares for 5 times what they were worth when they floated. Market demand.
Rick?
You mentioned a figure of 35%. Is there any magic in that? What's
No magic at all, Councillor. No. Just, I think that would be, if you went lower than that, paying for the IPO would be too expensive against the process. But I would suggest that you'd never go higher than 45% sale.
Sure.
I'm seeing 10% there as a pot of gold for the future.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Right, I'm off.
Yeah, well,
Thank
thanks
you.
for coming all this way.
Oh, it was a long way. It was downhill.
In that case, it won't be going home.
Thank you very much. And I wish you well in your deliberations, because this is a big thing. Enormous.
Sure is.
And I hope you're getting a lot of interest and useful submissions.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Who's missing? No one. Oh, just a spare chair in the corner.
Yeah, no, Fenton always likes to have a spare chair next to him.
Need a bit of room.
Okay.
Thank you.
What's the time? Oh, we're running a bit in front.
You will see me tomorrow, yes.
Arthur, would you like to do your submission now?
I get 20 minutes because I'm starting early, do I, Mr. Graham?
No. Sorry, Arthur. But it was a damn good try, though, as you walked to the podium. So, Arthur, yeah, well, you know that you've got 10, and I think when I took the clock talk, of course. And Arthur, it's really useful if councillors know who you are and what you do in Hawke's Bay.
Yes.
Floor is yours.
My name's Art Hooper. I live at 21 Parnia Place here in Napier. I've spent 50 years away from New Zealand in Canada, where I was a school teacher and finally worked in the same university that your right-hand lady worked at in Kamloops. So I've known it for longer than you have. As a matter of fact, I hope I'm not wasting my time.
You are.
I introduced her to her husband, so it's been quite a long time that I've known Leanne. And I'm retired back to New Zealand after spending many years here as a youth, going to Napier Boys High, and then to Ardmore Teachers Training College. So I'm an ex-educator. So good afternoon to all you councillors. At the beginning, I want to be clear about the port development. Some expansion is indeed necessary. It is the process of raising the monies needed that I'm not in favour of. In particular, selling any share of the port out of the Hawke's Bay investors. Right now, the freighters and cruise ships seem to be the issue. They're getting bigger, and they're wagging the tail of the port administration, saying they won't come back to Napier unless better berthing is built. I don't believe this argument, because Napier Port has seen huge changes in my lifetime, as the local economic base changed from frozen meat and wool to other primary agricultural production, and now tourism. The cost of maintaining a deep water port is far too much for a secondary port like ours. There will need to be continued dredging, more powerful tugs. Wellington and Tauranga do not need the type of maintenance of a breakwater facility such as Napier has. and therefore can continue to handle the larger vessels. Already we get freight redirected to Napier from the deepwater terminals. I see no comprehensive business plan that looks into the future for apples, wine, kiwi fruit, squash, logs, meat or water. However, the historical record for primary industry is plainly there. For the world demand for our primary production is fickle, as is the tourist industry. At this time, surely it is these producers who have to front up to the cost of the need of expansion, because this council has bled the port of monies needed to retire their debt of some 86 million. Many of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council services are on a user pay system. It is only fair the users of the port pay their share, not the ratepayers. Bond issue, only available to Hawke's Bay people, might do the trick. Once the port debt is retired, the port company can look at raising its own financing. But the port has said it can self-fund the cost if it can get rid of the 86 million current debt. Selling up to 49% is an option, as the port could be bought up by offshore investors and the port profit sent out of the country with the apples. Even the port of Tauranga, heaven forbid, might buy it. 51% is not control, as there's a possibility the Hawke's Bay Regional Investment Corporation could lose control should a downturn occur, or the port decides for more growth, making this council having to add to the share with ratepayers' money. There's been no information from Hawke's Bay Regional Investment Corporation about looking to the government for a low-interest loan. Shane Jones has been moving around New Zealand with his money bag, dropping monies in areas of need. If indeed the port is in need, then why is this fund not being tapped? No, the port cannot be sold. To fund the needed expansion, other ways of doing this funding are so much better than dabbling in the share market, where one has no control over the value of the asset. And respectfully in closing, a small warning. The poor strategy on water retention by the previous council resulted in many of you being elected, and I strongly advise you not select any of the options promoted in the consultation document, which was very poorly distributed to ratepayers, I must add. Or many of you may not be occupying the seat you now sit in. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Art. We do have time for questions, and I wish to put one myself. You say that the council has bled the port of monies needed to retire their debt. I was just wondering, what do you think is an acceptable dividend of profits?
I've dabbled in the share market all my life. I'm always happy to get, these days, anything around 5%. Most of the time it's less than that. But I'm not keen on going into the share option. I believe that we have in Hawke's Bay many people who would be willing to go into a bond issue. The advantage of bond issues to me is that this money comes from Hawke's Bay and it goes back to Hawke's Bay. And that's the important part of it. Whereas if we buy into the stock market, it could go anywhere. It goes out of the province. And I strongly believe that the port is ours. The community around here knows that it's mainly responsible for the development and the work that goes on in this area. And I think those who use our lands and stuff in the immediate vicinity to the port know how important it is to them and would be probably very willing to be involved in some sort of joint financing with this council.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you, Chair.
I've framed this question very carefully because our chairman's really concerned about us making statements. We've actually prepared a document that shows the level of dividend that the council has received from the port as a percentage of the total profits from the port over the past 10 years. Would you like a copy of that document?
Yes, I would, thank you.
Very good. I'll give it to you right away.
We have time. Another question?
There you go.
Thanks very much.
Oh,
Benton.
I'll have another go at your one.
Yeah.
So without you having a chance to read that, Mr. Hooper, but the question that our chairman asked was something along the lines of, you say we've taken too much money out in the form of a dividend. What would be an acceptable level?
I'm sorry, yes, you're quite correct. I did not hear him. I turned my hearing aids up as he started to speak.
I'm
so
far more interesting to listen to. It's a good, good observation.
That's why he talks to himself in the bush.
sorry,
The question is,
please rephrase it.
yeah, well, I'll rephrase it. So, what percentage of profit do you think is acceptable for dividend?
Profit from the port.
Yes, the most profit. What?
Well, what I don't know is that the port has maintained that it can self-fund itself. But its problem is the 86 million which it now has as a debt. I don't know how quickly they could self-fund a loan that they took out, because I really haven't had time to look at that type of stuff, Mr. Graham. I'm sorry. I really can't give you an opinion that would be helpful to you.
Okay. Thank you. So, and thank you very much for your submission. Really appreciate you coming along.
Thank you.
You have a gap, but Paul, are you able to do your submission now? I know it's a bit early. No, I know. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, again, to my daughter gets here, I've got my assistant, or my boss with me.
I see you have your assistant. That's really excellent. So, Paul and your daughter,
Sonia.
Sonia, I have met you a long time ago, Sonia, but you've grown up, mate. So, well done coming along here. So, Paul, we have 10 minutes, and if you want to
Has
leave...
everyone got the submission?
Yes,
the
we
written-
have, and
Yeah,
everyone's
cool.
read it.
Okay, that's excellent. I actually won't speak to that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I'll just generally speak. Okay,
Right,
cover the topic
and
reasonably.
also it's a good idea if you introduce yourself
Yep.
and say where you fit into the Hawke's Bay scene.
Cool. Okay. Right. Thank you for the opportunity of presenting today, Mr. Chairman and fellow councillors. I'm Paul Harris, and today I have my daughter Sonia Harris with me. She's no stranger to the council chamber. She's been here on many occasions, not so much in submissions, but in other meetings on various rural issues. I'm a farmer from Tutera, so farm here to the north, sheep, beef and dairy. I'm obviously an exporter. I have interests in horticulture. I have no direct interests in the port. My interests are solely around the future of the Hawke's Bay, my daughter and family. My family I do have indirect interests in that I've been brought up in a transport and logistics environment, and they are the third or second biggest container handler in New Zealand. Okay, so I do have indirect interests and a good knowledge of port operations, obviously being brought up in that environment alongside agriculture. So the submission today, I've got a written submission there. I've put that in there. That's all pretty self-explanatory. I'll just talk to it in general because a number of things quite disturbed me about what I saw in the analysis and what I saw. The other thing I probably should comment on, I worked for a number of years for Deloitte as a financial advisor, so I did probably 20 years travelling the world with different port companies and different ports. So I've seen most of the ports on the western seaboard of America and around Australia, so I've been on ports. Right, just taking it up. Let's look at the port to start with. Its job is to service this community, the exporters, etc. That's a changing dynamic. It doesn't matter which way we look at it, it's constantly changing. We're getting a lot more spoke and hubbing, and you've got a huge diversity on the port. You can't say it's one business. You've got logs, which is quite a separate business from the container side, from the fertiliser importing side. So you've got a number of businesses on the one port. I was really a little bit, when you look at option D, it nearly went there, but not quite. A licence to operate is a great thing. If you look at any ports worldwide, not any ports, will be fair about that, the majority of Melbourne's a good one to look at because it's close and it's something we can relate to. It runs under a licence, and it's not one licence. The community's still got their gold and their silver, so they own all the assets. It runs on quite a short-term licence so that you can reinvent the social world if it need be, because things change and they change so quickly today. So what was acceptable freight-wise 5 years ago or 3 years ago is not acceptable today. So you have to modify our behaviours to do it. And we're seeing a lot of pressure on the port here around what you would call stranded assets. In other words, the risk is if we invest in an asset today, it's not relevant to tomorrow's environment. And what's proposed here has got quite a big risk of that. So the licence to operate when you've got a port, and it will be divided into 3 or something similar, probably depending how you want to break the business down. I would love to see more analysis of it because it's a norm, is when you've got that licence to operate, it lasts for probably a 13-year period, but with renewals along the way, so the community's getting their social input into that licence. And it's the biggest revenue gain, because at the end of the day, you're selling 3 businesses, not one. You'd probably sell 3 licences to operate. And when you look at cargo values, think about cargo values. If I put a unit load of lambs out of my gate, they're worth about $150,000. If I put a unit load of milk out my gate, it's worth about $26,000. If I put a unit load of apples out my gate, it's just over the 30 mark. If I put a unit load of logs out my gate, it's worth $3,200. Logs are big, heavy and hard to handle, and you've got to really watch how you handle them. So that's the diversity of value you're dealing with. So when you've got a high value cargo, it's worth shifting it a long way because it gives you quickness into the market, the speed into the market's the key, and you can cater to different markets. Look at any of the bigger shippers, they call it Tauranga once a week, they call here fortnightly. So you can shift something to Tauranga in a day. So of course the high value cargoes are at quite a lot of risk of being lost to the region unless we appropriately identify where they should be and what's happening. So it's generally, I think the stranded asset scenario, I think really wants a lot of thought. It's easy to borrow a lot of money, always, it's hard to pay it back. Ask anybody with a Harvey Norman loan. Usually they work for me often. But the cars, things like that, easy to borrow the money, especially on a utility such as this. But it's often hard when you think about the payback side because the market moves on us. So doing better with what we've got today is often a better one. Recognising the way the world is. Certainly I'd favour, I suppose, a hybrid of option C around licences. I think that's a good one to operate with. But I think, you know, the big container ship myth, I'll give you a little scenario of Fonterra because I'm quite close with Fonterra in terms of being a shareholder. And I often listen to what they've got to say. Sometimes I accept, sometimes I don't. They get a 400k bonus, the management, if they get a big ship in. Seems great to the ego, a big ship. We've had a big ship call. Headache you get is the smaller ships are cheaper. They move the cargo where you want it to go at more ports of call. So at the end of the day, the big ships are a little bit of a myth unless you've got a big port. And just remember 80% of empties come into the north of New Zealand. They've still got to be moved once they get here. Shuttle services are great. Look at Port of Nelson. They've just gone to a shuttle service into Wellington. Wellington's invested in cranes. It'll be fascinating to watch whether they become stranded assets or not. So I think it pretty well sums it up. I'll leave it open to questions. I won't absorb too much of my 10 minutes. So I think I've covered everything here, that just in more general terms than what I had. But I think as an exporter, yeah, I need a great service. Okay, I definitely need a great service. And I look to my community to provide that great service and port. But at the end of the day, let's think about it a little more laterally than perhaps we had. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. Questions, we have 2 here. We'll start with Tom, then we'll go to Fenton.
Thank you. We've had a number of people come in and submissions say that users of the port are not paying their fair share. What do you have to say about that?
Look, I often say to my daughter when she was 5 and came home from school one day and she said, Dad, you can't say that. And I pulled the car up on the side of the road, right outside the Matahua Quarry, and I said, turned around and I said, Mrs. Brady said it. And I said, honey, there's no such thing as fair in the world. Okay, there would be users at that port when you look at the pricing structure. The balance sheet of that port's under challenge. I'd never been forced to look at it before, but when I looked at the balance sheet and looked at that, I thought, oh, it's not as good as it could be. You know, there's quite a lot more debt there than you'd think. And I'd say there is quite a degree of cross-subsidisation going on, Tom. Okay, which some customers are hard to keep than others, so you can't. Fairness, what's fair and what's right? I've had this debate 3 times today, not about the port, but about other things. So sometimes you've got to take a compromise to get an overall outcome. Sorry to not answer the question, but
Well, if
Are you prepared to pay more?
if we were to consider, as I think 2 submitters previous to you, that we should have a levy as part of an option to finance, would that be I mean, what is the impact you would imagine that to have?
You're going to put the levy on me as a ratepayer or the levy on
No,
me
as a user,
Export?
as an exporter?
I'd just go somewhere else. I'm just going to go to Tauranga. It's very close now for high value. I've got high value stuff. You know, I'm going to move to Tauranga.
So you're feeling that close now?
It is close. It's close to that. You know, there's a whole. We've already got stranded assets at this port, and I don't want to cover them off because it's too close to my indirect relationships. Okay, you've got to have. You know, we've got a management sitting over there that can probably run 10 ports, but as a council, we've got to pay for them and the cost that goes with them. So that's the sort of scenario you're getting into with technology today. You can operate a lot more assets than you ever could. So, of course, yes, we would. Truck rates to Tauranga have dropped hugely, and it's where the empty came in from, and it's how you organise your business. Is that a fair answer to that? So it is close. Yes.
Fenton?
Thank you. You talk about preference to have a strategic partner rather than float shares. We get to control the first negotiation, but say they wanted to shift and we didn't have too much of an influence over who bought the shares, assuming we couldn't do that ourselves, or weren't in either financial position or it wasn't prudent to do so. Is that a risk? Do you see that as a risk?
I see. Great question, Fenton. I can see a number of bits of your questions. I just want to pull it apart a little bit. I should have touched on, I was a bit remiss. Shares are a problem, okay, in today's world. And I've said this to a number of businesses I mentor lately. They want to float on the share market. The management get distracted. The chairman gets distracted. The influencers become wrong. They always got to paint a positive light to the share market to keep the share price up. Okay, I think Fonterra went down that road and I think they're regretting it. Okay, so they can't paint that positive picture. So I'm wary on the share market. I know Synlait, I had this discussion with them after they'd listed on the unlisted share market. It's expensive, it distracts management, and your chairman always has to paint a positive picture all the time. I think one of the biggest risks around the port, when you touch on risk, is actually that as a shareholder in that port, without an operating licence in place, you become liable for a number of actions on that port should things go wrong completely. Wellington saw that with the rearrangement and the earthquakes and things like that. So that covers that. But let's cover the licence. Licences are great today because they're like, as you say, a partnership. You would renew that quite frequently, so you're keeping the social side of it up and you're keeping it relevant. You can't let it run for the 50 years we talked about in here because the irrelevance of it comes in and people's motives become quite different to what they should be. We want a good port for the Hawke's Bay. Okay, to have a good port for the Hawke's Bay, we have to be fluid. And when you talk about, everyone say, oh, an operator's going to come in for the profit. They're not going to come in for the profit. They're going to come in because it suits their logistics somewhere. And that's why we need 3 licences, because there's 3 businesses at that port. There's import, there's of the fert and things, there's the wood, which is a very different business. You know, even now, they're divided up into marshalling and, you know, you divide them all up. And then there's the containerisation, which is very different again. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. We've run out of time, I'm afraid.
okay.
But thank you very much. And
Yes.
thanks for bringing your daughter home. Is school finished, has it?
School's finished today.
School's finished today.
Right, yep, last
Great
day,
stuff.
prize giving this morning. School's finished.
Ah.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank
fellow.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay. Thank you, guys.
What are you going to do for the afternoon treat from here?
We've got a couple of things to do. And we just had lunch. That was a treat.
Is that-
All right. To say you take your daughter to the most exciting places.
I do. I do at other times of the year. With the good comes the bad. Look at that. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Paul.
I don't know what everybody's here, but I know Gordan Tapp is.
Is Mr. De La Tour here? No.
Bellator.
Bellator. Not.
I hadn't thought of that.
So, Mr. Tapp,
Would you like to come up?
Mr. Tapp. I'm on 3. Yeah, you are, but we're running a bit. The other fellow hasn't come. You want to take his place for a.
Well, I'm helping you out.
You are definitely helping us out. Is your wife going to come up with you, or is she going to?
If I can.
Yes, you can, certainly.
So I'm holding her hand.
No. She'll have to hold your
You
hand this
look
time.
like I haven't seen you.
Yeah, no, up you go.
And it's quite hard to hear too.
Is
It's
it?
the best microphone.
Oh. Put up with it.
She's not flashing.
Well, thank you very much for coming along and making a presentation. You've heard you've got 10 minutes,
Yeah.
and that also includes councillors' questions. And it's really useful for councillors if you can introduce yourself and tell us where you fit into Hawke's Bay.
Yeah. My name's Gordan Tapp. I'm a retired registered clerk of works.
Clerk of Works. Wow. Clerk of Works.
Would you like me to hand those around?
No, I don't want to read them and interrupt them.
All right.
I paused. So, you ready to go? Give me a
There will be some coming shortly. Right, our port, have your say. Investing in our port to support a growing Hawke's Bay. My preferred option is for the ownership of the Port of Napier to be vested in a publicly owned independent body for the benefit of the people and stakeholders of Hawke's Bay. This will allow the Hawke's Bay Regional Council to carry out impartially the work of regulation and compliance, which should be its primary function. This work has been neglected for far too long. This port is at the limit of its borrowing capacity from the banks and has a debt of 86.6 million. This debt has been steadily rising each year for 20 or so years and is now due to excessive dividends being demanded by the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. The attempt to build a Rotanifa water storage dam was futile, and 50 million remaining from this efforts have been handed to an investment group to make a return on them. Very risky business. This sum is part of the excessive monies that was demanded as dividends over the many years from the Port of Napier. One gets the impression that this funding that could assist has been salted away out of sight in share investments. And now the government is being asked to provide top-up funding. It appears to have refused this request and is supporting the railway resurrection. Good on them. One gets the impression this funding that could assist... The Hawke's Bay Regional Council appears to be supporting the finance industry and meanwhile neglecting its legislated duties. Because of a large debt from excessive drawings being taken from the port over many years, the Hawke's Bay Regional Council now wants to get more capital from it by whatever means, including selling part or all of it. Any selling of shares in the port would be of concern to the New Zealand Shipping Federation and the producers of Hawke's Bay, as the previous gentleman said. As costs would increase and services are likely to suffer. There is no guarantee that cargo will be available in the future, nor to where it will be destined. A drive through the pine forests of the Whirinaki, where much ground is now bare, indicates a lot of timber has been removed, and at any time the quantity and value of timber may reduce. There were plans to extend the port back in 2009, and instead of being able to save for this, a major slice of the port profits were creamed off to the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. The port is a vital piece of infrastructure that serves in the export and import of goods and also the tourist trade. There appears to be wide agreement that to build a new wharf number 6 at this point of time would be foolish, as there is a settling down period still taking place and questions as to where cargoes will be placed. Quote from the New Zealand Shipping Federation. Additionally, the deepening and widening of the shipping channels for enormous new vessels may further upset the ecology and environment of the surrounding port surrounds, West Shore beaches and possibly afield. In Napier here, we are not a Tauranga. We are not a large English port. We're an artificial port, and we've got to take due care when developing it. Comparison has been made in port documents with the Tauranga port. This is built in a natural harbour which should have no problems accommodating very large vessels with few modifications required and provides safe conditions. It has considerable cargo storage space and so can operate to the very highest of standards. Napier is not a Felixstowe. If the port's plan for expansion was to be fully implemented, it would double the value of the port, which would require it to double its annual profit to remain as profitable as now. It appears it may become overcapitalised in the future. The port appears to be very well operated and can be a valuable asset in its present form to economically manage market changes in cargo levels. If capital work is required, then save for it or borrow a prudent sum to cover it. Built up reserves. Now is not the time to sell or dilute the value of our public-owned asset. The $50 million investment that the Council lodged earlier this year should be returned to the port to cut down in debt, cut dividends to maximum 20% profit. And this $50 million, can someone tell me all about it? It must have come from the port originally, I presume.
Came from the sale of land.
Came to the sale of leasehold land.
Well, yeah, and fair enough. I think they should probably sell a lot of other things so they can freehold the port. I think it was careless to invest $50 million when it could help the port. Let's put the major developments at the port on hold, clear the debts as soon as possible, and carry on transporting cargo as efficiently as ever. And I've got an analysis here on this goes back not 10 years, but 18, 9 to 17, 11, 28 years. And the amount of money being taken out of the port's profits for the regional council has just increased. I don't know how Waikato, Hamilton, Palmerston North, or other places where they haven't got a port, how do they reduce their rates, or how do they subsidise them? Any question, any answer?
No, sure, it's your 10 minutes. We're all under heavy instructions not to, unless you want us to. If you get this council debating, they'll go for it.
Well, go for it.
I have a question for you. If I could get a question in, because we're running out of time. So what you're proposing is a corporate structure to put the port into that's separate from the regional council. Regional council will thereby not get its $10 million dividend. Have you calculated the rate increase that would incur if that happened?
Oh, well, I've seen figures.
I'll tell you.
But how do these other councils don't have this?
No, but at the moment, 10 million subsidises rates.
Yeah, well, I think the regional council has been imprudent to take so much money off the port. It's a very important function.
It's a 45% increase.
Yeah.
So would you be happy for a 45% increase of rates?
Well, you'll have to adjust things. I think there are other options.
So Gordon, to answer your question, the Horizons Manawatu Regional Council owns part of the Port of Wellington Centre Port, and it gets a revenue stream from there, and they formerly owned a part of Port of Napier, which was sold, so they have an income, they have a set of assets as well that generate income. The Waikato Regional Council similarly owned shares in Port of Tauranga originally, which it sold, and it owns shares in the Auckland Airport, which it subsequently sold as well. So, and possibly Ports of Auckland. They've got over $100 million in managed funds. So every regional council in New Zealand has an asset base that generates revenue and subsidised rates similar to
Anyway, we're out of time. But Gordon, I really appreciate you coming along, and you've obviously done a lot of really good in-depth thinking about this, and we appreciate your thoughts. And thanks for your wife to coming along as well.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Hey, you've got a handout?
Yeah, you got a handout, yeah.
Mr. De La Torre here? You too. But he's not coming. Is George McCawe here?
Yes.
No. George. No, I know you're here. I know you're here, Ronald. Don't worry. Thank you, George. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks, George.
I know what your job's like. I'll tell you in a minute. I've got one similar to yours from Quarry Bank. You would have read through this by the time I speak.
That's right, yes, no, you're quite correct.
Feeling out like that.
Not the man I used to be.
Thank you.
Welcome, we've got a bit of time. And whippersnappers called my grandson calls me George.
Does he? Well, I won't call you that.
No, I can give a bit of cheek to each of the councillors as I go around. There's a method in my madness. You would have read this by the time I was sitting there. It's great knowing what a man's going to say before he says it. I'm very disappointed with your shirt, by the way.
I know. I got told. I would be too.
Yeah. It's really
You told me it was the same one I had on yesterday.
It's really dowdy.
It's all right.
I'll be letting your current partner know. Notice I say current partner.
That's current.
Jesus, he's a hard man.
Now, George, you leave our
Mr.
council.
Dick, I'll certainly treat you with respect.
Now, George, you stop picking on our councillors and just sit down.
He's playing favourites here.
Yeah, he's playing favourites.
I know. It's a subtle psychological game.
Mr. Chairman,
he's playing.
first of all, I object you trying to stick up for some of these scurrilous dogs.
George, now, you know, rules. I've got 10
Here are the
minutes.
rules.
10 minutes, and if you want to have questions, you've got to build it into that 10 minutes. And it's really useful for councillors if you introduce yourself and say how you fit into Hawke's Bay.
Mr. Chairman, I really didn't want to do that because most of my life I've been very mercurial and have suffered from a great advantage of people not knowing who the hell I really am.
Well, it's about to change. You're on TV.
This is probably one of the first times in my life I've been put in the hot seat and asked to say who I am. I'm 72 years old. I'm a besotted grandfather. I'm currently a wedding singer in China that gets paid in gold. And I work for Macquarie Bank. It's complete nepotism. My brother is the CEO of Macquarie Bank. And when he goes to China, I act as his executive officer when we're doing billion-dollar deals like the funding of Nanjing Airport. My current partner, who's a bit crook in bed, you would have really, well, most of the men in the room would have enjoyed seeing her. Some of the women would. She's a lovely little Chinese lady. With quite a valuable amount of money. She said, come along and tell them if they need a bit of money and I like them, I'm willing to give it to them.
Mercurial, was it?
Mercurial. I was a teacher in the New Zealand education system for 50 years. I was a guidance counsellor at Taradale High School for 35 years and spent other roles like in the senior management team of Taradale High School and being a coach of Neil Curtin's two sons. They were in crack adventure racing teams, and Neil and I had some great time together in 2004 and 2005, didn't we, Neil?
Absolutely, George.
Neil's wife also worked with me at Taradale High School, so there's some people, Mr. Graham, I know very well, and treat with respect and certainly won't abuse or comment on the colour of their shirt. To the point in hand.
We're using up time here, George.
Is that what you've got yours covered?
This is not a submission from one man. I want to make it clear that none of these are my ideas. I have never had a creative or worthwhile idea in my life. But I am incredibly good at being a chairperson, Mr. Graham, and noticing who, after much discussion, has got the best idea in the room. I've got quite good discernment. And I have listened to a huge number of ratepayers. A comment was made yesterday that they were quite surprised a lot of ANSI people haven't come around. ANSI people do not sit here and talk to you. I found that out in China when I was negotiating billion-dollar deals with my brother. They tend to stab you in the back in other ways by suddenly you find you've got a lawsuit on your hands. This is not a submission of one man. I have talked to a number of friends and colleagues. Yes, believe it or not, I have a few friends, Neil, and fellow ratepayers who've asked me to come here and represent their views here today. Please find another way of raising funds other than options B, C and D. I'm talking to the handout that I gave out. I've come here yesterday, today, and heard some of the people speak. I haven't heard too many people speak for options B, C and D. These options are thought with unseen difficulties, and they are not currently in the best interests of ratepayers. The port should continue to be owned by all Hawke's Bay ratepayers. Let all Hawke's Bay ratepayers retain their sovereignty. In the age of globalism, entities are finding it very difficult to retain their sovereignty. Those entities, no matter what they are, city councils or the city of Nanjing, or the Rotary Club from Timbuktu, once they start to give away little pieces of their sovereignty, huge difficulties arise. One example, the EU and England's situation. By selling shares, you cannot ultimately determine where they end up in the long run, and much needed wealth could leave Hawke's Bay. I'll miss out reading through the section on having a lawsuit on your hands, but I think before you move further, much further, I would challenge the Chief Executive, sir. You need, on behalf of the Council, to work out if a possible course of action could be considered legal or illegal in a court of law. Read what I've read there. Turning over the page, last page, coming to a conclusion. Crystal ball gazing is incredibly difficult. I often find that it's better to be in the know, Neil, when you go to the Hawke's Bay races and have your own horses running and ask the jockeys to pull them back, and knowing that they're certainly not going to win because they'll ride to my instructions. It's very hard to work out what's going to happen in a race or in any sort of future event whatsoever. Futurising's pretty difficult. But I think any fool can see that Tauranga is a deep water port and has a huge future and huge problems. Hawke's Bay, eventually, either by government directive or just the natural flow of history from this point on, the Hawke's Bay port will obviously end up as a feeder port. It's got nowhere to expand and needs to be managed very efficiently. Other people who've worked with the port for years say it's been terribly mismanaged. That's hearsay as far as I'm concerned. I wouldn't write it down here, but I think the way the port has been managed needs to be looked into. I would urge you either to have a proper referendum of all ratepayers or raise funds through a creative combination of user pays, rate increases, seeking a regional development grant or other creative fundraising options. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to come here today. I'm not going to sing because I only accept gold as a token for singing, but I'm willing to answer questions.
I thought Neil Curtin would do your whiter, but no. Questions, councillors? Tom, then Paul.
Thank you. We've heard a lot about the first three of your options on the back page here, but what are the other creative fundraising options that you have in mind or heard about?
I've sat here over the last 2 days and heard quite a few. Even though I work with financiers and lawyers that I haven't got much time for in negotiating deals, I'm not an economist, I'm a people person. So you're asking me a question which is far beyond my expertise. When I used to associate with Neil, I'd shoot my mouth off about anything. But now I'm involved in not million-dollar deals, but billion-dollar deals. I've certainly learnt to keep my mouth shut and only open it when I'm sure I know what I know and no one's going to sue me.
Neil Curtin, I think.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions?
Yeah. Thank you, George. You've been speaking to a lot of people, obviously.
Yes, I have.
Said,
Well
yep,
over 100.
Well over 100, right? And I've come up with this idea of a mixture of user-pays rate increases and so on.
Yes.
Did any of them give you any indication of what they thought, or did you get a feel for what they thought would be a good mix in that respect? Or?
Yes, I listened to Robin speak. Sorry, Scott, I've forgotten his surname. Gwyn. I listened to Robin speak, and there's a lot of support for what Robin Gwyn says. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I myself have no opinion on that, but that's what I've heard.
Time for one more question? Thank you very much, George.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Thank you for the opportunity of coming here.
It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Mr.
Novel approach.
Ron, would you like to come up now? Or will you bring your wife with you? Or
Didn't teach me for dressing myself today.
come up there too.
That's Ronald, is it? Do you not normally? Sometimes get my clothes put out. Jesus.
Well, welcome, Ron. It's really a pleasure to have you here.
Ronald Wilkins.
Now you have 10 minutes, and if you want time for councillors' questions, you've got to fit it into that 10 minutes. And it is really... Councillors, can I have some attention here? We have a guest in the room.
As an aside.
It's really useful for councillors for you to say who you are and where you fit into the Hawke's Bay scene.
Right, very simple there. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and councillors for giving me the opportunity to speak. As I've just heard a couple of speakers speak, I'm not up with fay with them. I have my views, and my committee and the members of Grey Power that attended and listened to Tom and his team talk about what they propose to do. So on behalf of my committee members that were present at that meeting, we are different to the other previous speakers, and we are going for the clause B of having 49% into the shares, provided, and this is the big proviso from our members that made it quite clear, that the shares are only sold to living New Zealanders only, and never to be sold outside of New Zealand and to overseas investors, but must be sold back to Hawke's Bay Regional Council if the person decides to sell his shares and they in turn wish to move overseas. We also feel there that we don't want to see the rich people getting richer, that we're all pensioners in Grey Power and on a low income, and we opted for B so that we could be proud when we drove down past the Napier Wharf and say to our grandchildren, we have shares in this, and that's what we would like to see. So we in Grey Power Hastings would recommend that we go for option B, but we retain the shares in New Zealand. They must be sold back to the shareholders in New Zealand and not leave our country at all. And we wanted to start off with lower volume so that I and my wife can spare $25 or $30 and buy some shares instead of $1,000, because we don't even have $1 between us because we're both pensioners and no other income. So we want to see that port there, and we can see that it's doing a good investment and bringing in the cruise ships and exporting our logs and material away from New Zealand. So, yeah, all for it. So that's it in a nutshell to me. Straight to the point. Let's get on with it. So any questions?
Councillors, Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ron. You representing Grey Power, Hastings and Districts in your presentation. When you had the discussion at Grey Power, was it a total consensus on going for option B, or was there a fair amount of debate as to where it
There was a debate, but at the end of the day, we had Anna Lork come up and say something about a referendum. That was because we had a bit of time to spare, so I allowed Anna Lork to have her tuppence worth. We also had another gentleman from the port who had a say. Again, I allowed that to happen because of we had some time there, and we then got a different cross-section on what was going. But after the feedback from those that were present, the majority felt, now this is we only had 70 people at our meeting, so the majority of those felt that option B was the better way to go.
So if you only had, if you only had 70 there, was that 36 people agreed, which was the majority, or was it?
There was more than 36, sir.
Okay.
Fenton?
So option B, and thank you for your presentation. Option B, you had a fairly clear directive, go to the market, but there are some conditions. Are any conditions negotiable?
Yeah, I don't think that was actually, they were very clear that they didn't want the shares going overseas. So the only way that we could stop that was to have that shares drawn up so that they retained in New Zealand if a person bought the shares. We don't want them seeing China offering a bigger money on it, and then because you had shares you were able to sell them. We want there that they must retain.
But outside Hawke's Bay is okay?
Yeah, outside Hawke's Bay is okay.
Before we come to we'll go to Rick and then you, Paul.
I heard you say living. Does that mean it's only for persons, or does it mean companies and corporations and superannuation funds?
No, I would say it'd be the wide spectrum, yeah. But as long as you were looking after the low income people.
I'm just thinking about the New Zealand Superannuation Fund. Would that be acceptable? It doesn't live as a person, but it's a New Zealand Superannuation Fund.
Well, I'd only be speaking on myself there. I couldn't see any objection, but it's not coming from what my committee and the members said. They were quite clear there that they felt that they'd like to buy into it, buy a share, but they couldn't have the money that the corporate people have and other people that have thousands of dollars that they could go into shares.
Paul?
That was my question.
Tom?
I know this is an organizational position, but in your submission you also refer to Marie Dunningham, who's given us some fiery presentations in the past and who I sort of think of as a classic socialist. So is she on board your position?
She had different views, but at the end of the day, and me being the president now taking over from her, I was able to convince her that the majority rules.
Well done.
And just and just to let you know, sir, who I know you, she did a write-up in your magazine. Maria's not a well lady.
Yeah, I understand that.
Is that right?
Please
well, I
pass
don't
along
think-
good
yeah,
wishes to
I
her.
don't think she would mind me saying so, but yeah, she's only got weeks to live.
Oh, really?
Yes, so that's come from her husband this morning when I rang to find out. So I know that Mr. Belford knows her, and
Yeah, I know.
And,
I know,
yeah,
I know as well. Can I just say, on behalf of the council, I'm sure we'll speak for everybody, can you send to her our best wishes?
I will do that, sir.
She's well known in the community. She's been a battler on all sorts of
She's a
issues so many
battler.
times. Yep.
Yep, she has, and I've I've recommended her for a life membership, and I've seen Mayor Hazelhurst of Hastings to get her into a civic award, and we're now, because I've just told the mayor today, I had a meeting with the mayor before I came here, and she's also said we're going to try and streamline something because yeah, she's a very sick lady.
That's a shame.
So I thank you for the opportunity to speak with us and pass on my sad news about Marie.
And you take our best wishes back.
Yeah, if you could.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. I really appreciate your...
I wish
frankness.
Hawke's Bay Regional Council all the best with...
And I really enjoyed coming along and speaking to you. It was great.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we be excused as we have other things to do?
Yes, certainly. Certainly.
Thank you very much
Thanks
for your
coming
time.
along. So Bay's still not here.
Did you?
He was due a while back.
I think he's
2:50.
DNS.
So we're now through everything till afternoon
Afternoon
tea,
tea.
and not due to resume till 4:20, so it is. So councillors, I'd just like to remind you all that in trying to organise the schedule, it's not just a case of us assigning people time, it's also trying to accommodate their availability as well, because we're not saying to people, if you don't come at this time, that's all we can do. So we necessarily having to work with people's availability as well, hence the reasonably big break that we've now got.
Just remind us on when we're starting tomorrow and what we're doing.
We're starting at 11.
Starting at 11.
Starting at 11.
Still, what about this 9 o'clock?
Well, I got a sense from councillors earlier today that your preference is to have a discussion afterward in terms of further instructions.
It's 11 o'clock start.
So if you can't make it back for that, Fenton, you could.
I should be able to make back for that. I'll do my best to get back as soon as I can.
With the 11 or 9?
So for 1 o'clock-ish. So we're running hearings tomorrow 11 to 1, but we then need a discussion with councillors about further information that you might require, further analysis you want done.
But the briefing is canned.
Correct. And
It's canned.
You're not going to come
Correct.
back, are you?
so, Rick, if you could give us your thoughts about further information requirements that you have after the hearings tomorrow, since you'll be leaving early.
So
that
that's
would be
us till
appreciated.
4:20.
Yeah.
Correct.
I'm just wondering whether we shouldn't maybe meet at 10 tomorrow so we can have a chat before the final submissions.
Well, certainly.
Given that it sounds like 2 or 3 people are going to have considerable difficulty afterwards, and I'd like them to at least have the opportunity to...
Well, Fenton won't be
engage.
there.
I'm good afterwards.
I won't be there.
Oh, you're good afterwards?
He's good afterwards. He's not. He's got to be in Havelock at 10, so
Oh, okay.
that precludes
Okay.
him.
Okay.
I'll be back at 4:20.
Okay, we'll adjourn to 4:20 then?
Yeah, we are adjourned for 4:20.
Adjourned till 4:20.
Have you got the list